Welcome and thank you for joining us for this webinar presentation. We are the Cybersecurity and Information Systems Information Analysis Center, or CSIAC, one of 3 IAC domains in the DoD Information Analysis Centers operating under the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC, within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Our informative webinar series highlights current and emerging research and technology developments. It presents an opportunity for accelerating the DoD's leverage of these advancements by increasing awareness and fostering technical collaboration. CSIAC serves as one of the premier information research partners and curators of technology advancements and trends for the cybersecurity and information systems community. As such, our organization supports those working in the cybersecurity and information systems domain of DoD research and engineering. We do so by helping navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information, allowing our customers to get a head start on their technical projects. With an understanding of the cybersecurity and information systems DoD research and engineering landscape, we provide research and analysis services. We help unlock access to information, knowledge, and best practices from government, industry, and academia to stimulate innovation, foster collaboration, and eliminate redundancy. We hope you enjoyed this webinar presentation and that it serves as a catalyst for community collaboration and improved DoD cybersecurity and information systems research.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation. My name is Philip Payne. I am the technical lead for CSIAC. Before we get started, I would like to note a couple of administrative items. First, if you are dialed in by phone and would like a copy of today's slides, they were posted to the CSIAC webinar announcement. You can go to csiac.dtic.mil/webinars and find today's webinar. When you click on it, at the bottom of the announcement, it will say download presentation. Second, all participants are muted, but feel to chat using the attendee chat window on the lower right-hand side of the webinar screen. You can chat with each other and I'll be monitoring that chat as well. However, if you'd like to pose a question for the Q&A session at the end, please click the 3 dots labeled more/panel options to bring the Q&A window as part of your layout. At the end of the presentation, I'll go over the Q&A. For the benefit of those on the phone, I'll read the questions out loud to the presenter. If you have any technical issues during the presentation, please have no fear. The full presentation will be available online. Check back to the CSIAC website once the webinar is posted. The GoToWebinar will take you to the YouTube link. With that said, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Fred Hiding is a research fellow at Belfer Center's Defense Emerging Technology and Strategy program at Harvard Kennedy School, where he focuses on computer security at the intersection of technical capabilities, business implication, and policy remediations. He's a member of the World Economic Forum Cybercrime Center, a board member of DEF CON's Misinformation Village, a teaching fellow for the Generative AI course at Harvard Business School, and a member of the Responsible AI Institute. His work has been presented at leading conferences and in academic journals. Dr. Hiding has helped discover more than 45 critical computer vulnerabilities. Take it away.
Thank you so much, everyone. Maybe before that, Phil, there was a bunch of chat comments about no sound. Should we address that? It seems like other people have sound, but should we look into that before I start, or should I just go?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. The sound should be fine. We tell all attendees to the right of the mute button, please check your audio options. There are different audio options, whether you have speakers or headphones. So just double check that. In worst case scenario, there's dial-in that you can also dial in if you're having audio issues. But I can hear you loud and clear.
That sounds great. I appreciate it. Can you see my slides as well?
Correct.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And again, my name is Fred Hiding. I also have Lachlan Price here with me, who I will introduce a little bit more on the next slide, who's part of the team behind this project. I'll talk for about 30 minutes with you, and then we'll have a big and long Q&A session where both me and Lachlan will answer all of your questions. So yeah, please write down any comments you may have. I should also say that this has been a long work for a couple of years, and we very recently released the report as a Harvard Belfer Center article. If you're interested in that, we'll make sure to link the report as well so that you can see it and read it after the talk. So if you're interested in getting more details about this, please check out the report afterwards. With that being said, this is a team effort, so I want to quickly mention everyone. You already heard my introduction. What I can sort of narrow down on a little bit is that my PhD was in computer science, so I come from a technical background, and I think that adds some value to our team. We are very cross-disciplinary. And I work together with Lachlan, who's the third bubble here. It's been really, really good to have Lachlan in our team. First of all, he's a brilliant cyber and policy intellectual, but he also was part of creating the Australian national cybersecurity strategy. So a lot of what we have done in this project on evaluating national cyber strategies to ask what would Lachlan and his team like to have had when they created the Australian strategy, and how can we use that information to help future policymakers with best practices and shortcomings we should avoid to really foster a climate where we just make global national cybersecurity strategies better for each different countries. So apart from Lachlan, we also have Alex O'Neill, who helped us and has done a lot of work on foreign state actors like Russia and DPRK. So we have a lot of information about the malicious parts of various threat actors and how we can take that and incorporate that into national cyber strategies to make them better. We had Eric Rosenbach, who's obviously a powerhouse in the cyber policy domain, who's been a fantastic supervisor to all of this project, and we're really grateful for all of his support. So with that being said, let's get started and talk a little bit more about the project itself. A word about national cybersecurity strategies. They've been around for a while. In some countries longer than others. Most countries had some ambiguous first versions that were quite different from the documents we see today. But it is relatively nascent as a policy domain because cyber haven't been around for that long. All depends on how you look at it. But most countries are in their third or fourth iterations. Some are in their first iterations of creating these documents. And most of you probably know what a national cybersecurity strategy are, but for those who don't know, it's in the very core of it, a PDF document. Some of them are 20 pages, some of them are 120 pages or even longer. Some of them are very technical, containing a lot of sort of factual, tech-heavy detail. Some of them are only visionary with very high-level remarks. So it differs quite a lot. There are some best practices out there, as we'll go into later, but they're not too widely followed. There's a lot of people taking their own twists and turns to create this. So we were really interested in trying to see what are the common best practices, what are the common shortcomings, and what can we learn from each other globally when all these people create these different strategies. A little more background about the project. This is obviously a fun picture, so I always like having it there. But why do we do this? Everyone knows that there's a lot of cyber problems in the world. I don't need to talk about this. Emerging technologies, especially AI, really changes the cyber game. Much of my other research as a technologist is to evaluate AI-powered cyber attacks. And as I and other people find out, AI is getting to a place where it really can benefit cyber attacks, also cyber defense, but in some areas the advantage is asymmetrical for attackers. So we really need to improve our defenses. That's something we all know. We need to improve technical defenses, but that's not everything. We also need to improve and create solid policy, ensure that the policy community and the technical community speak with each other. And the main body of communication a country have for their national cybersecurity strategy is the document that we're talking about here. So it's really important that this document contains everything it should contain, so we have an idea of what it really should be. And that sort of leads us to what we're doing here. Do we know what we're doing here? We had the pleasure of talking with a lot of the different agencies around the world working with cyber, and luckily they're all brilliant people, extremely smart people, both technical and policy knowledge, creating these strategies. And we were just curious in answering questions such as, what does it really mean for national cybersecurity to be good? What does a good strategy entail? And they really differ, as we're going to go into more detail on later on, but everyone tailors their strategy to their own geopolitical context, which makes sense. But there are some common good elements that most strategies include. And part of this presentation and this work we have done is to be able to create a framework for new countries, especially emerging economies, who don't have as much of a budget as modern countries in creating cyber strategies and cyber documents. So you can easily find a framework to start off good and ensure that you have a holistic view of what you need to entail. We're also quite interested in who's the audience in these documents. It's quite clear when you analyze different documents that are written from different audiences. Some of them are written for policy audiences, most of them are, but some of them are way more tech heavy than others. So it differs quite a lot. That's fine. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but it's good to know these things. And it's good to think about it. especially if you're writing or revising a strategy, to know what's the purpose of it, who is it written for, because it does differ a little bit. Should it be, purely visionary? Should they be very tech detailed and difficult to read, or should they be very easy to read and contain less real information, so to speak? Also, no real question, but it differs quite a lot. So that's something interesting we looked into, and different countries really have different approaches here. So with that quick introduction, I'm going to give you just a little overview of how we went about and how we investigated all of this. Then I'm going to go to the results and spend most of my time talking about what we found out and all the interesting nuggets that I think will be most fun for you to hear. If you're interested in any specific part of the method or the results, I really recommend you to read our article. It's quite detailed, about 70 to 80 pages. It contains so much more information than what I say here. There will be a link to it in this presentation. I think we'll try to make sure that there's a link on the website as well, so that everyone can easily go to our document and read it there. Maybe someone can circulate it in the chat as well. That would be fantastic. So with that being said, there are some frameworks today for how to analyze cybersecurity strategies. All of them are good. One thing that we thought a lot about with existing frameworks is that most of them are sort of narrowed down to an absolute score, which means that you say that the Netherlands is a 9 of 10, and the US is a 9 of 10, and then Australia is a 10 of 10, and so forth. That's very useful because it facilitates an easy comparison, but it nagged us a little bit. And it also nagged a lot of other people because, as we all know, cyber is extremely complex, and it's quite difficult to justify these scores of, for example, having a cyber capability of 9 of 10. Well, what does that mean? Even in different areas, what are the justification algorithms for creating those scores? And we weren't completely satisfied with what we found out. So what we started working with was a relative scoring system where we care much more about how the strategies look and work in context to each other. Because everything we really care about is, well, what can we learn about this? What can America learn from Australia? What can a new country such as Sweden, where I'm born, what can we learn from US and Australia? And how can we make sure that we find the globally common themes are really good, so everyone knows that there's some good things, everyone does them, and we should keep on doing them. We don't need to focus too much on these. We can just mark them out. And then there's some common bad practices too. Maybe most people do these things, and then we just need to ensure that we raise the bar, so we remove these things. And sometimes you find out outliers where one country does something quite different from everyone else. For example, Japan is really leading in protecting vulnerable population groups. Most countries neglect both small, medium enterprises and vulnerable population groups. And that's quite interesting. That's something we really want to highlight, these outliers, to make it easy for everyone to learn from each other. So that's a big motivation with this work, is that we want to implement this relative scoring system for national cyber strategies. And yeah, we really believe that you can't score a country in isolation. Everything is related these days to each other. So it boiled down to this method here. And again, if you think this is very interesting, look at the report, because I can't talk about this in the depth it deserves today, but I'll give a little overview. And we have a quite robust framework with 268 criteria over 5 pillars. I'll describe all the pillars briefly on the next slide, but there are things such as protecting critical infrastructure, protecting people, generating cyber capacity. All of these good things we need to do to create a healthy cyber ecosystem in our country. So we evaluated all of these categories. We looked at the strategies and try to find out, well, how well are they doing in this? And we started with a bunch of different justification criteria for each of these elements. I'm not going to go into all these criteria, but a lot of things that we could boil down to basically binary yes or no questions, made it really easy to proceed and score this. And the way we scored this is leading, meeting the bar, or lagging. So we didn't give them a number. Of course, this is technically just 1, 2, and 3, but much more than numbers, we had an iterative system. So when we scored them the first time, and we had a bunch of different interviews with industry practitioners and with policymakers, we basically say, well, this is what our assessment looks like. What do you think? You work with this, people on the ground, do you agree? Is there something we missed? Then we updated all the scores. We looked at the countries again and iterated to see, well, how should we polish this? Does it really make sense that Australia is leading here, or is everyone leading here? So this is not so interesting. By doing this, again, we really were able to highlight what are the interesting things that policymakers want to look for. Because if everyone is doing something really good, it's not so interesting. Everyone is busy. We don't want to spend our time looking at that. We want to spend our time looking at, well, what's something that I didn't think about that Japan is thinking about? Perfect. Then I can look at that and solve that. So that's a lot of the rationale for this work. And we had some limitation factors to our scope. A big limitation factor is just the time. So we didn't have time to look at all of the countries in the world because this is a quite in-depth analysis. We're expanding our work a lot. So we're going to do several follow-up studies here. So if you don't see your country and you're interested in being included in the future study, you're very welcome to reach out. And then we're happy to, it's always easiest for us if we have a connection with agents in the country. So if you're interested, please reach out. But to start with, we want to have countries with strong cyber capabilities and some sort of a diversity, so that political diversity or geographic diversity. So try and cover countries from different parts of the world. And want to have documents that are publicly accessible in English. Therefore, Western, not necessarily Western, but non-totalitarian states. We have a big list of the limitation in our document as well. I don't want to go into too much. We also had new documents that are relatively recent, because some countries have not just published a new document, and then it wouldn't really be an apple-to-apple comparison to include it. So the framework itself, 5 pillars, as I mentioned. The first one, to some degree, the backbone of everything here, is protecting people and infrastructure. Everything from governments, critical infrastructure, the people themselves, and to some degree, how well does this country work with forward defense? Just how do we defend everything in our country? An equally important part is the capacity. How do we work with generating a healthy workforce in the cyber domain and the general technical domain? Because if you can't have only a good cyber workforce without a good technical workforce. The technical and computer science skills is extremely important. So you need to foster those as well. And have a good cybersecurity market, foster innovation. Most countries are working very well with this, so that is good to see. Partnerships are interesting. They're very vital, as we all know. You cannot solve cybersecurity in isolation. Everything is connected these days. I get a lot of questions about partnerships from various journalists and other people I talk to these days, because there's a lot of things happening in the world, and a lot of people discuss alliances in general. And there's quite interesting discussion about cyber alliances and what will happen in the future. And I'm quite happy to talk about these things as well, because I think it's interesting. But we really need to have a lot of partnerships in cyber. And all the countries work with this, but they're quite different. So different countries have a very different approach to how they work with partnerships, which of course makes sense. There's a lot of factors to play in. Just simple things such as, are you a large country or a small country? Where are you located? Etc. etc. So very different partnerships approaches, and we can learn a lot from each other. How well are different responsibilities being codified? Cybersecurity is going through a lot of shifts. In the beginning, some companies didn't even work with it. Then it became a sort of must-to-have, annoying thing. A lot of people, they are starting to see cybersecurity as a business enabler. So it changes a little bit there too. But it's really interesting and important from a national perspective that have a clear sense who is responsible for what. What is the responsibility in the government sector, in the private sector, etc., for our national security? Because it's impossible to not realize today that cybersecurity is very vital to our national security. So then we need to have responsibilities to make sure that who is responsible for, if a power plant is breached, and who is responsible for protecting that, etc., etc. This is sometimes clear and sometimes not clear. A lot of good lessons and learning opportunities here as well. This communication, this is a little bit of a meta point, but it is important. Fortunately, every document we analyzed is very easy to read. You can tell that the countries worked a lot with this. It's easy to digest language, a lot of pretty appealing figures and graphs, so that's quite good. Most countries do lack some accountability and time phrase. They can be a little bit hand-wavy language, as perhaps often is the case with these documents. So that's something we would really like to see an improvement in. But this is the overall framework that we analyze through interviews and through our scoring system, etc., etc. So now I'm going to show the results, and I'm going to try to do something a little bit daring here, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share another screen. So I hope you're with me when we go here. So this is quite fun. This is actually an interactive scoring system. So everyone who's, let's see, we get back here. Everyone who's interested in this can just go to the website again. You can even see the domain here where the report is. And in the report, we have an interactive scorecard. I'm not going to go through all of this because that would take a long time. So I'll talk to here. Really encourage you to play around with this. And you can see the 5 different pillars we have here. You can also see quite clear that each pillar is divided into a number of subcategories. And each category, you may ask, well, what does it mean that Australia is leading in critical infrastructure? Well, each category is divided, or subcategory is also divided into a bunch of different elements. So for example, for critical infrastructure, well, we made it up of financial sector, the critical manufacturing sector, etc., etc. For all of these scores, we have a lot of justifications, again, boiled down to binary yes and no questions. I'm very happy to talk about after this talk or during the Q&A about how these numbers were gotten there. For this specific example, Australia has a really good Security and Critical Infrastructure Act from 2018. It's getting a little bit old now, but it was a good document at the time. Anyways, there's a lot of different results talk we can have here. I'm going to show you on the slides a few more highlights from things we find extra interesting. All the countries work a lot with critical infrastructure. The main drawback here is that most countries fail to protect their vulnerable population groups. There's some discussions about citizens, but vulnerable population groups who are more and more targeted in cyber attacks, especially scams. There's a lot of scams towards the elderly. That's a big other leg of my research, and there's very little support for them. So that's something we really encourage people to work more with. Almost all countries work with generating capacity. We see relatively positive scores here. One thing that's often lagging is that most countries do not work with non-technical cyber workforce. So everyone knows we need more programmers, we need more pen testers, but we also need more cyber lawyers and cyber policymakers. And some educational programs start to tackle this, but we need much more. I think this will be very important in the future. Again, partnerships, everyone is doing something good and something bad. I think this is pretty interesting. So no country is excelling in all partnership, which makes sense because you just can't have time for everyone to some degree. So you have to select a little bit. Will you focus heavily on your domestic partnerships, on your public-private partnerships, on international and global corporations? And these things can change in time too and be dynamic. There's a lot of different constellations here. And there's a lot of lessons. I really encourage you to read up on the partnership section of our report because you can really learn from how different people in different countries work with this. And I think it's probably going to change in the future as well. So with the coming iterations of new strategies that will be published in this decade to come, this will probably not look the same as it looks now. That's something interesting, right? We'll be able to go back to this and sort of benchmark how did this look in 2025 and then do new score assessments in the future. Some scattered score here as well. The US is doing quite well here. Most countries are doing okay, but there are also quite a few laggards where some things are a little bit unclear. I think that this is a rather common problem that some agencies work against each other. It's not always clear who was responsible to do what, and you really can't have that in cyber because you need to be able to be very, very quickly and know exactly who is doing what if bad things go down. I don't really have a need to stay too long in the communication part, but this is everything is doing rather good at communicating it, but the timelines should be clear again. So this is an overview of how this views. I can sit there for hours and just press around. So if you're interested, I really encourage you to go to this website and play around with it yourself. That link will also be shared after. Now, I will make my way back to the results. So that worked well. Before opening up for the Q&A, I want to highlight some things that we think are extra important. First of all, some strengths and weaknesses across the board, then a few extra noteworthy country-specific highlights. I mentioned this to some degree. The technical workforce and encouraging entrepreneurship is strengthened in almost all countries. I think this is a rather obvious one. Most countries know, even if you're a small country, that you can't do this in isolation as the government. You can't really work with cyber as we work with traditional military either. Military also requires innovation, but you really need a close industry partnership with cyber. There's such a thin line between industry and just industry computer science applications. We see that in the cloud world with the recent Google acquisition of Wiz. And it's a rather thin line between just general operation uses and cybersecurity. And you need to have a healthy ecosystems where people work together. You have software developers who become cybersecurity developers and going back and forth and so forth. So I think most countries, they're aware of this, they know this, and I'm very happy about that. This is some degree a point that requires explanation, right? Because a lot of people could probably look at me now and say, well, we work in critical infrastructures and there's a ton of problem here. We know. I should also add the limitation that this report is not looking at the on-the-ground situation. It's looking at the strategy, the strategic posture. And there are a lot of things to be left desired. There are a lot of things to be improved, as you also can see if you look into the scorecard for critical infrastructure. But it's acknowledged. All the documents do talk a lot about this. We have to mention this strength, but there are definitely things that could be better too. But there's a lot of focus on all the documents. It would be very strange if this was not the case, because of course the critical infrastructure is a prime asset we need to defend, and we're relatively aware of that. We're all very passionate about industry partnerships. We believe that's absolutely crucial. Everything from AI company partnership in this modern world to other partnerships with other cybersecurity companies. Cyber is industry in so many ways, and we really need to work industry close. Most governments are aware of this. I'm very happy about that. I would have been pretty concerned if that was not the case. So that's something good. Now, AI and quantum are quite a big deal. Some people believe they're more buzzworthy than others, but it's pretty impossible to not see the fact that especially AI is drastically changing the cyber landscape. There's so many attacks that are becoming way, way, way cheaper to launch for attackers, and sometimes defense systems are becoming way cheaper to use for defenders, which is really positive too. So we have to use these tools. We have to stay ahead of the curve, and there's almost no government that forgets this. So that's also something reassuring. Everyone is kind of realizing that we will have to publish a lot of updated iterations to the national cybersecurity strategies in the future, because this is something that goes quickly. We try to include it now, but we'll also update it in the future. And the language deserves a little shout out. So one could imagine a world where these documents are very boring to read and tedious to read. I actually find them quite enjoyable to read. It all depends on one's taste, but they are very easy to digest. They're written in a way that are usually quite clearly structured, and I really appreciate that because it is quite dense reading, and to make that easier makes a lot of difference when you digest a lot of these documents. So not everything is positive, and it makes sense to talk a little bit about the weaknesses as well. One of the most pressing ones is vulnerable population groups. Again, a lot of my other research on the technical sides investigates AI-based attacks on different population groups, and various minorities, especially the elderly and vulnerable population groups, are extremely susceptible to these types of attacks. And there is no document really talk about these. No strategy talks about that. Maybe we need to have personalized protection plans for younger people, older people, tech savvy people, other types of people, because a country to some degree is only as strong as its weakest link, and there's a lot of attack vectors. And of course we have to protect our critical infrastructure, and that may be the first priority, but we also need to protect our people. We also have to make sure that we don't have these scam factories in hostile countries that scam people who lose all their savings, and then the foreign attackers, they get money to support malicious and criminal activities. It's quite problematic, and we need to have way better protection about this. So I think that's something I would like to see in the coming strategies. I hope that happens. We also need to be aware of the fact that, it's very good that we want to train a lot of cyber professionals and in the technical sense, and that's great. We really need to. But we have to open our eyes a little bit further and realize that that's not enough. We also need the entire ecosystem. We need business leaders to see and analyze and know the national security implications of having poor cyber or having good cyber. We of course need cyber lawyers and cyber policymakers, and we're way behind the curve, I would say here, because cyber is becoming more and more interdisciplinary, and we need to make sure that everyone speaks an adequate level of cyber. Incentives is perhaps the biggest and most pressing problem that I see out there. There are some positive trends, and I really like that, of changing cybersecurity as a business enabler. Try to make sure that you just restructure your technical environment so you gain operational benefits and you also gain more security. This is amazing, and we need more of this, because we're in general rather bad at quantifying cybersecurity as it is now, and just saying what is the exact dollar worth of cyber, and going over, we have all these cool technical defense tools, but we're still relatively bad at translating that into growth and profitability for the businesses, so that you can easily say that implement this security tool and you will save this much money. A lot of people still believe that, well, this it's just a cost, and I'd rather take the risk than doing all of these investments. And we need to be able to convert cyber to monetary value and just create clear incentives to make our world more cyber secure. These documents are good, but they do lack from an absence of clear timelines, assigned responsibility. A lot of the language sounds good, but then you read it a couple of times and realize, well, does this just sound good, or is it written in a way that makes it clear that something will actually happen, that someone will do this, and they will do this as a specific timeline. If they don't do this, there will be some sort of a negative consequence for them not doing that. So I'm reaching the end, so if you have questions, just hold on to them a little bit more. And there's some not positive, neither positive nor negative things that we want to mention that are quite interesting, that pops up when you think about these things. And one interesting point is how to balance regulations with recommendations or other incentives, because all the countries think about this, and there are a lot of different attempts. There are a lot of different opinions. We have things such as the certifications, a lot of different certifications out there, but they're no fix it all either, because sometimes you have certified, you need to certify yourself to become a pen tester for critical infrastructure. But there are a lot of instances where that doesn't necessarily breed the best pen testers. They just breed the people who are good at getting certifications. We don't want that either. So it's rather tricky to figure out how to juggle all of these things. Also, cybersecurity agencies are, I would say, incredibly impressive. I've met, so coming from a technical background, a lot of computer science people have this sort of belief that policy people don't really know anything about technology. And I'm very happy to say that that's not true. This is probably true for some, but the people we've talked to from various agencies or other policy roles about cyber, they are extremely knowledgeable. They work very quickly. They create almost like a startup culture in the agencies where they know things go fast and they move fast and they learn quickly. And I think that's brilliant. I'm very happy about that. And a lot of people also share this belief that they haven't reached an end goal. They need to keep innovating and keep iterating. I think that's interesting. How will the cyber interesting look like? What will they look like in 5 years or 10 years from now? I think that maybe there's no clear answer to that. It's probably good to think about that a little bit. Fighting cybercrime, I'm not going to stay too long on these bullets now, but it's interesting. How do we achieve attribution? How do we do that in better ways? How do we fight cybercrime together? Should we have combined forward defense programs? Should we not do that? Lots of questions here. I'm going to leave that for the report. Yeah, also collaborations. I mentioned it a few times. I think it's really interesting. There's so many different ways to collaborate. And that's definitely something that we all have gotten our eyes a little bit more open to. A few country-specific highlights. I would like to not stay too long on this, but it is fun. So there's something we want to mention. With the US, I'm primarily going to focus on the shift, really strong focus on shifting the responsibility from end users to producers, and I think that's brilliant. Every change has positive and negative parts to it, but I really like the food metaphor here. If I buy, a banana at the supermarket, I kind of believe that banana is going to be, it's not too many poisonous things in that. It's not toxic. I can eat it and it's healthy. And those regulations are rather good. You can believe whatever you want about regulations, but to some degree, I can trust the food I buy. And a lot of my early career, I did a lot of pen testing on IoT devices. And as most of you know, there's an incredible amount of vulnerabilities in these. You can buy the smart cameras or smart door locks, and almost any kid can hack them quite easily. And that's bad, right? We have these really bad scandals that the smart cameras are being hacked, or baby monitors are being hacked, and the criminals spy on babies, which is really, really bad. And that shouldn't be the case. Like, the producers have to be responsible for this. If a company sells a smart camera, they can't have a default password of 4 ones or 4 zeros. That's terrible. That can't possibly be legal or okay or good. We have to completely remove that. It has to be a way higher bar, especially rather soon, or already now, we have automated pen testing bots who can just test all these things very quickly. So we need to change this. I'm happy that the US and many other countries are pushing to change these. A lot of states in the US are creating stronger data privacy law. I probably think that's a good thing, but it's still quite fragmented. It's difficult to know sometimes if you have data centers throughout the US and you move throughout the US, which laws are relevant for you. And it could be good to have a bit more coherency here. There's some different opinions about that, but the data privacy laws are rather fragmented. One thing that I really like to mention about the UK, and the US has a similar initiative here now too. But the Industry 100 initiative is really, really cool. It basically aims to add security clearance to a bunch of industry professionals to facilitate the public-private partnerships and have industry professionals work in cybersecurity, but they can help and provide input to certain government cybersecurity parts, just to remove that bureaucracy barrier. Because I think so many times in cyber, especially in partnerships, we don't really need to add anything. We just need to remove bureaucracy, make it easy for people to talk and just have a meeting. Well, because a lot of these people know each other. You work at one company and then you work in government, but make it easy for them to talk and work together. That's really useful. I'm going to focus on that for now and blast through some of these. One highlight about Australia that is really cool, is also something that we like to talk about, is the separation of incident response versus law enforcement. Because this is a classic thing in cyber. You have a cyber breach, the government really wants you to report that cyber breach, but as a company, you're kind of scared because you know that if I report this, I did something wrong and maybe I'm liable and they're going to punish me for being wrong. And as a government, we want to incentivize countries to give us all the good information. And one good way of doing this is to say, okay, we can have different entities, so to speak, for collecting the cyber breach information and for punishing you. So to try to make companies a little bit more safe in saying that, okay, we will report this breach, definitely. There are a lot of other regulations that pushes for these too, but I like that. I like that incentive as well to try to make that better. Lots of other good things here as well, but I will leave that for the report, and I'll focus on the positives because that's a little bit funnier. Singapore, there's so many highlights with Singapore. Just a fantastic cyber team and cyber strategy, really, really competent. What's extra noteworthy is that this document is actually from 2021, so it's rather old, but it still holds a very high standard. So incredible cyber power, I would say. Also quite interesting because Singapore has a little bit more possibility to have surveillance, to control things than in the Western world, and that works to their advantage. Sometimes they can create a more secure cyber environment. Really strong regional leadership as well. So many good bullets with them. So yeah, I can just talk about that forever. Some few more remarks. I think it's really fun to mention the South Korean example. It's a really good example of how a country can use signaling in their cyber report. So their previous national cybersecurity strategy, that's quite old, didn't mention North Korea to an extent, which was a little bit criticized by some folks. And the new cybersecurity strategy from South Korea has a lot of focus on North Korea. It's very much of a signaling document. It really is a good sign that the cybersecurity strategy documents is to some degree just a reflection of the political environment at the time, right? So these are political documents, however you want to frame it and however you twist and turn it, and you can really see that in the case here. I think I will focus on that for now and just conclude this talk because I'm feeling a little bit done here. Takeaways, something you should remember. We are pretty good at generating technical cyber competence. I'm somewhat biased because I come from a computer science background, but I do believe this is key. I think it's absolutely impossible to have first-class cybersecurity without the first-class technical workforce and environment. And you need to have this sort of dynamic environment where someone works as a software engineer as a really good tech company, and then they learn all the tech best practices, and then maybe they go to the Department of Defense for a while, then they go back to industry, or so forth, to create a really interesting and appealing technical workforce in general. I think we're good at partnerships. There's a lot of really, really good cyber partnerships, threat sharing intelligence networks out there, and I'm pretty happy about that. I'm also part of some of those, and I see all the good things that is doing. That's not to say we're completed, right? We can always get better, but I think it's quite good. Some shortcomings in these strategies and things we should think more about. I've talked about the vulnerable population groups a lot. I'm pretty passionate about that. Again, much of my other research focuses on that as well, but we do need to protect them. There's a lot of tailored attacks. It gets really cheap to launch cyber attacks. And of course, most of the protection out there will be B2B, that everyone can focus on businesses. We need to protect the people as well. Private sector incentive alignment is also extremely powerful. I think we need to get much better at making it clear and obvious and easy why and how much companies should invest in cyber to help them doing it. And yeah, last shout out to generating a bit more non-technical cyber competence, because we will need more of those in the future as cyber gets integrated into everything. The report is out. Hopefully this link will be in the chat or somewhere else right now, but it's here as well. So you will have the slide. So if you want to read the report and you don't have the link, just go to one of the last pages and you will find it. We do some cool future work. We're going to do this type of analysis on, emerging economies, on other types of states. We also do a lot of work with evaluating national security risk of AI infrastructure, and figuring out how likely is it that, for example, AI model weights can be stolen. There's a lot of talk about DeepSeek and the knowledge extraction these days. So I'm doing a lot of classifying in this. I do a lot of national security studies related to fraud and phishing and scams. That's a super interesting point for me as well. So if you're interested, feel free to shoot me an email about these things. I'd like to talk more about them. And that's the end. So I'm very happy to invite for a Q&A, and also for you to hear Lachlan's voice as well, and not just mine. Thank you.
Very much. Very interesting presentation. We do have some questions in the chat, so we'll start the Q&A now. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, and we'll step through those one by one. Our first question from Matthew: with regards to the shifting responsibilities from users to companies, are companies being held liable for their products? Are companies getting sued for poor cyber protection for their products?
Lachlan, do you want to take it? Because I talked a lot.
Sure. My understanding is that type of structure, penalty structure, is still emerging, and that no country, as far as I know, is actively holding companies liable for breach or for negligence in this way specifically. But there are some encouraging movements, especially towards having software bills of materials, for instance, so that there is some basis of legislation in the future. But as far as I know, actually, the answer is just a straight up no. Unless, Fred, are you aware of any countries that are implementing that kind of, or in which the judiciary is involved in this?
I think maybe we'll see more about that in the future. I mean, we have a lot of folks believing that there'll be some really big, I mean, we see some big class action lawsuits. We'll probably have some bigger in the coming years. But I think I'm on the same page as you for that one. But I'm happy to discuss more about that later.
All right, thank you. Our next question from Stuart: have you thought about having metrics to deal with level of concentration in the cybersecurity marketplaces of different countries? That is, what are the country's strategy to deal with oligopoly or even almost monopoly situation in many cybersecurity marketplaces for both products and services? It seems that some countries' strategies support certain suppliers over others.
I can give it a shot to start, but I'm happy for you to take a look. So this is quite a handful, and I think I would need to sort of map this question out a bit. Basically, I think I understand it correctly if I say, do we have metrics for sort of how to work with different cyber markets? Maybe to classify, is this market almost if this market legitimate, or is it closer to the dark net or the black market? And I mean, one obvious thing there, and I actually do this in a lot of my research, I quantify just. I work together with some economics research, and then we make an economic modeling of the cyber attacks that we investigate. And I think that's quite helpful to just see, well, what's the worth? What's the value of being a white hacker? What's the value of cybersecurity? And in a lot of the research that I do, if you live in the US, if you live in a relatively well-paid Western country, the economics doesn't really make sense to be a hacker. For me, obviously I spent a lot of years being a legitimate person, but I would earn way much more money if I just went to work as a cybersecurity consultant somewhere than if I were a criminal. Maybe I would make more money as a criminal than an academic. But I could always it really doesn't make sense. I think that's the main thing, right? You want to make it really beneficial to be legal. And with these countries, a lot of the sort of nefarious cyber countries that we see out there, the living standards are quite poor. That's a big statement. Of course, there's a lot of deviation to that. But again, I encourage you to look into my research paper and read the economic calculations, because we have good frameworks for this. And one way to solve this, right, is to, for example, make it easier to do outsourcing, increase company collaboration, increase country collaborations, right? If it's really easy to, obviously that's not the case, and there's a lot of hindrance to that right now. But if a North Korean person could, instead of being a hacker who's forced to work in a spam factory, for example, if they could just take an outsourced job at Google, I think very likely they would do it, because they would earn so much more and have such a better lifestyle. And there are complications to this, but increasing these, in a perfect world, I think this is where we should aim for. Lachlan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, a few things. This is a really, really interesting question. My sense is that there are 3 different strategies that we have come across that different countries are using to try to deal with concentration of markets. The first is surprisingly international engagement, or maybe not that surprising. But from a US vantage point, it's very easy to forget that these companies are mostly American. You know, Microsoft, Google, obviously are big players in cyber, especially Microsoft these days. And so consequently, where a country like where I'm from, Australia, is trying to secure digital infrastructure, they need to actually reach into the US in order to influence these companies. And so the way in which they do that becomes quite important. That's why it's part of our framework. The second thing is like stimulating workforce development more generally. So taking a step back and thinking about the market, right? And now looking at other types of players in cybersecurity. So maybe not the infrastructure providers, but companies like Cisco that provide more direct cybersecurity services. Most countries have some kind of marketplace stimulation policy where they're trying to either inject money directly into research or make frameworks for better training for cybersecurity professionals, or some kind of workforce development initiative in order to stimulate a more competitive market for those type of players. And then, yeah, I think so. The third thing which I wanted to mention is touching on what Fred said about facilitating markets for cyber insurance, which is kind of downstream. So we think at the moment, part of the reason why there's not a great deal of competition in the cybersecurity marketplace is because it's pretty hard to quantify how much a company should be spending on securing a threat, right? Like, how do you quantify the risk of a systems outage when you don't know the probability of it occurring? And so there's only one country in our sample which we were impressed in terms of making strides in the direction of making it easier for companies and countries to quantify this risk, and that was Singapore. So they have an initiative called the Cyber Risk Management, I think, framework, which was a joint venture between the Singaporean Treasury and the National Technical University in Singapore, where they looked at providing tools to companies to help quantify cyber risk and therefore facilitate a stronger cybersecurity market. So yeah, so to summarize again, those 3 things: number 1, international engagement; number 2, workforce development and market facilitation; and the third thing is quantifying cyber risk. Probably the 3 different types of policies we've seen.
Thank you. Next question from Robert. With the zero trust mandated by DoD for minimum compliance by 2027, where do you believe other government agencies and private companies are?
You can go, Lachlan.
I think behind is the short answer. But actually, yeah, it's quite opaque, and it's hard to tell. And this is a problem, right? Like, transparency is an issue for government and private companies with regards to where we are. I would say, like, looking internationally, which is really where my knowledge is strongest. Other countries have been looking at doing this for a little while. And so to the extent that their policies have been talking about zero trust architecture and securing government systems in particular, they may be like a year ahead of the US, but honestly, at most, right? And we're talking about maybe Singapore, maybe the UK are a little ahead, but it's not a substantial lead at all. And I think this is an area in which the US typically leads. I mean, when I have written, secure software for Australian DoD, and we were using US Air Force hardened containers, right? So it wouldn't surprise me if, in fact, the US has more secure government infrastructure than other countries. What do you think, Fred? I'm curious for your thoughts on this one.
I think that's good. My only point I wanted to add to that is the sort of the broader national zero trust that could play against the US a little bit is, for example, in Europe, where I'm from, it's very, very common and widespread to have digital identities, which is one way of course, endpoint zero trust security. So whatever you do, you have your digital identity, and that's verified, which actually creates, from the decentralized perspective of the entire nation, it creates a more secure environment. So to that degree of sort of very holistic security, I think that's just, I want to make a shout out for European digital identity scene, because I think that's great. The US will have that. It's coming. I know it's coming, but it's taking time. For the governments, I don't think I have much to add to what you say. I kind of agree with that assessment. I would believe. I think that it may be, yeah. I think there's like you could different strengths and weaknesses within U.S. government cyber operations, but I will just accept what you said because I like it.
All right, thank you. Next question from Lisa. Shifting responsibility from users to private companies being a strength is debatable. Do you see any weakness in this strategy?
Keep at it, Lago.
Sure. It is debatable. I think that it depends on the user type and what do you mean by responsibility, right? Because if we say, for instance, that a user had the opportunity to implement MFA, which we know is like one of the most effective tools we have available to protect users, and they don't take it up, right? They have the option, but they don't use MFA, then I think in this case, that's reasonable to hold the user responsible. But where the issue we see is like upstream, where if there's no option to do that, then should we hold private companies responsible for that? Or is there an infrastructure vulnerability which users have absolutely no control over? And we've seen that being a problem in many, many hacks previously, right? Where people, have their passkeys in their GitHub repositories and those are hacked. I mean, like, how can a user be held responsible for that type of a breach or negligence? And so from that perspective, I think my opinion is that this is it is appropriate for companies to try to hold companies liable or responsible more broadly for securing our digital infrastructure. Fred, I'm curious, can you think of a way in which like it would be good to hold users responsible? It's a really interesting advocate question.
I like that question. It's good. And I mean, I'm going to answer with a story as I sometimes do. But I mean, yesterday I had a discussion with a friend who went to a lecture here at Harvard where they talk about free markets and discuss, should everything just be legal and determined by the markets? You can buy someone's kidneys and you can buy a murder and the price is set by the market and it all works out because it's a free market. And these discussions are fun, right? Because you have them and you discuss things and, there's always plus and minus. There's always strengths and weaknesses with each approach. Is it possible to over-regulate? Is it possible to place too much of a burden on industries? So perhaps you stifle innovation, you lose other advantages. Yeah, that's very possible. We could do that. But again, as you said, like I want to be able to buy a product and know that some baseline security is there. And we're quite far away from that. So right now, I would push, it's all about finding a middle ground, finding an equilibrium. I think now we're too much on the side of companies creating really, shitty products, excuse my language for that, but in terms of security. And just the same way, I want to be able to go to the supermarket and know that everything in here is not going to kill me. I want to be able to buy a smart camera or a baby monitor and know that there's no chance this baby monitor will have a hard-coded password of 1234. And so yeah, I like there's always a possibility to do something wrong. Europe will probably end up over-regulating this, and then maybe we'll tail it down. But I think we really need to place more of a demand on secure products because it's I shouldn't be able to teach computer science undergrad to hack a smart door lock in 5 hours. That's not good. So yeah.
Thank you. Our next question from Marcus. What are your thoughts on ways to improve cyber policy and law in the face of consistently changing political landscapes?
Luckily, you start, but then I have something fun to say.
Yeah, there's currently no international framework for cyber cooperation. And there have been movements in that direction. That the UN last year introduced a general resolution on this topic. And it's been introduced multiple times. But my view is that more international cooperation outside of the framework of Five Eyes, for instance, which is where actually most of this occurs currently, would be beneficial. And something akin to a charter of cyber rights, right, might be an interesting way in which we could adapt to the changing geopolitical environment. But it's a tough question. Policymakers are always behind in cyber because it's such a fast-paced domain, and that's why we wrote this paper. to try and help folks stay ahead of the game?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one thing, when I sort of shifted a little bit from being a pure technologist to dive into parts of the policy world, I was quite passionate about ensuring that cybersecurity was a non-partisan field, basically. That you can make cybersecurity without introducing too much politics, and definitely without making changes every 4 years, because that's just stupid, right? And that's, unfortunately, I think that's very much the view of a naive technologist, because it is partisan. We see all these things, right? As you mentioned, if you have a more labor-oriented government, you will probably have somewhat more protection towards the people and the small, medium enterprises. If you have a government that hawkish on a specific nation, you will have a cyber strategy that is more hawkish on that nation. And these thing changes, I think that it's possible. I would need to do way more research about this, but I think that you can find areas where most people agree on, and you can really try to lock down. I think the Secure by Design initiative is pretty good. No matter what your political opinions are, we should not have really bad passwords. And that's good. Everyone can agree on that. Then we just double down on these areas where everyone can agree on. And some things will probably change. For example, how much money do we spend on cybersecurity education? And maybe that will change. But if you can find some nuggets, the most important part of security, and really ensure that they are consistent and we can just work on them throughout time, I think that would be very, very good. And some parts will always change with geopolitical tensions, and that will be annoying, and we will just have to deal with that.
Thanks. We have one follow-up question from Edward. He says, can you elaborate on your previous answer concerning not being able to find a way to ensure a company in regards to cybersecurity attacks?
I think that's referring to the underdevelopment of the insurance market. So specifically, we think that like cyber risk assessments are still quite immature, or at least there's no kind of standardized way of evaluating cyber risk. And what that leads to is effectively just underinsurance in the market. But the problem is that, if we mandate cyber insurance, then there's moral hazard, and then government being a reinsurer in that market would be a bad idea, for instance. But what governments can do is help to develop tools to quantify cyber risk in a way which they are happy with. And so we haven't really seen much development in that field except for Singapore. So that's what we were talking about before. But just want to check that actually answers the question if it was the follow-up.
And I'll just say one follow-up to Lachlan's answer. I think maybe we answered your question, maybe we didn't, but then we can do it later. But as sort of point on cyber insurances, I think cyber insurances are brilliant. There's a lot of really smart people working, and we need way more smart people working with that. My problem there is that show me a study quantifying the dollar value of cyber externalities for a cyber attack that can't be changed by orders of magnitude based on how you make the calculations, because you always can. And this is really problematic. Like, we want to triangulate and be able to say that all of these different economists analyzes the externalities cost of a cyber attack, and they all find the same result. That doesn't happen right now, because you can tweak values that drastically change the cost for the actor. There's different stakeholders, right? But the cost for the state, the cost for the end user, the cost for the company. And that's problematic. Like, we really want to narrow down these numbers so we have a quite small variance to what's the actual cost of cybersecurity is. And I think that's where we need to start.
Next question from Marcus. Have you looked at the potential impacts of attacks on critical infrastructure on the general populace? We all saw what happened when AT&T went down for several hours on the U.S. West Coast. My concern is on the impacts to the civilian side when the technologies they depend on become unreliable or unavailable.
Freddie, you want to take that one?
I can take that one. So yeah, we've been, again, I can almost keep talking about externalities here, right? Because only the imagination is sort of the end goal here. But you probably heard about the Düsseldorf hack in Germany where a woman died. I mean, that's it, right? I can sort of mic drop after that. The hospital was hacked and a woman died. That's terrible. That's death. That's as bad as it gets. Obviously, that was one person, right? And it could be much bigger. But things are becoming more and more interconnected. We have baselines of cybersecurity, which is good. But one thing I often talk about is that the incentive structure is, again, not necessarily clear. Like you don't, like how much money should foreign actors spend against causing disruption? But yeah, I think the end user consequences can be very large. We are also aware of the new so-called living of the land vulnerabilities. There's a lot of dormant malware that we probably have in our US critical infrastructure. What would happen if that were all exploited and powered on at once? There could be really bad consequences. Cyber attacks are usually, I would never say that people do cyber attacks in isolation, right? You do a cyber attack when Russia attacks Ukraine to amplify their attack. You do a cyber attack when a foreign actor wants to do something bad to the US, when there's an election and they want to cause some interference, when there's a hurricane, and perhaps then they disrupt some hurricane protection services, and that could have tremendously bad consequences. So yeah, there's a lot of bad things that can happen, and unfortunately, I think that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg on that for now.
Thank you. Our next question from Joe: do you think the proposed U.S. Cyber Trust Mark program will gain a foothold with vendors?
I hope so. I would like to see more international cooperation on stuff like this. I think if other countries were to adopt, I mean, other countries have similar initiatives. It would be helpful if they were aligned and uniform and save companies costs. But I mean, the other analogous types of trust marks have been successful. And I think users are increasingly caring about their devices being secure, especially if it's an intrusive device, like having a Nest system in your house. You probably care about that being secure, right? So I think the market will probably drive adoption, yes.
All right, thank you. We're right at 1 o'clock. We have 2 more questions in the chat, and we'll end it with those. But we'd like to thank our presenters for a great presentation today. So these last couple questions, we have one from Stuart: should cybersecurity threat intelligence be a public good, quote unquote, not a club good? For example, disease control information and public health regulation.
What do you think, Fred?
And that's a big, and to some degree, maybe even a little bit politicized question. But I think that, I mean, cybersecurity is a very good question, actually. And a lot of the papers I write have a big ethics session, because there's a lot of offensive security involved, and you need to include these things. I think, should all threat intelligence be publicly available? I can start talking about that. And I don't necessarily think. I think that the 90-day disclosure time is really good. I think that's pretty amazing. If we, after that, there's a lot of interesting questions, right? I think it sort of depends on the ordinary laws as well. If you, the information you mentioned, I don't know, but let's take a simple example. Let's say that, there's threat intelligence about social security numbers. A lot of social security numbers are stolen. Is that public? No, we should hide them. It's not good. It's not, I don't think it's mature of us and responsible of us to publicize that. Or there's, sensitive information about people who are in sensitive positions for whatever reasons. So I think it depends. We can be a little bit smart and analyze that from a case-to-case basis. And I think that's what I would say for now. It's also different between like the general broader community. Do we need all the private people in the world to know this, or do we just need integrated cybersecurity community to know this? Also, again, in the future, more of this is just automated, right? Maybe we can just feed it to the algorithm. There's a lot of problems there too, but we could feed it to the algorithm, let the automated protection tools know about this without letting the people know about it. That's, I think that is becoming more and more common as well. So, yeah, a lot of digressions, but you can add something if you want, Lachlan.
Oh, I actually fully agree with what you said. Nothing more to add.
All right, and we'll close it out on this last question from Devin. If you were to advise a grad student on a cyber risk management subject as a thesis paper research topic, where would you focus?
I mean, maybe I can start, because I'm kind of doing some related things. But let's see, the cyber risk management project. I think this is very close to some of the things I'm doing right now, which is fun. But I would say I'm very. It's a little bit of deviation of maybe what the grad student wants to do, but that's grad student life. So I would force that grad student to do more econ research, because I am extremely interested in better quantification work. So, like, again, in order to classify the cyber risk, we want to know the dollar value. I talk about the dollar value a lot, but it's super important. Like, we can't possibly create a risk assessment without knowing what is the worth, what is the real cost to our organization and to the end user and to the state of all of these stakeholders. What are the costs to these if a cyber attack happened, and how does that differ for different attacks? That would be, that's a fantastic. If any grad student is out there wanting to work on this, I'm happy to talk with them about that too, because it's really useful work.
So yeah, to add on to that, I think like probably I would think about it in two different ways. One is like risk to company, which we think is actually quite well developed, but to quantify that as the probability and then scale of risk and then the dollar amount associated with it. But then to double down on what Fred said, I think taking a more macroeconomic lens and looking at it from the perspective of like, what's the externality, right? So if a company is attacked, there are costs for the company, but then there are costs to its users as well. And that's where the underinsurance comes from in the cyber market. So I think that's where a lot more focus should be.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our friends at Harvard for their time today, giving us a great presentation. It was obviously valuable to the community based on the active Q&A session that we had. As far as some administrative items, this is being recorded, so please check back to the CSI webinar announcement. We will put the full recording up there. There's also a link to the slides on the website as of right now, and we also posted the link to the full report, the website that we saw today live in the chat as well. So if we didn't get to your question today, you can submit a technical inquiry to CSI. We can do some more research for you, get you in contact with the presenters. And we love to hear from you. Please fill out the survey on the way out. If you want to hear new topics or different topics or a part 2, anything like that, please reach out to us because we do these webinars for the community. So hopefully we see you next month for our May CSI webinar. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. It was great questions. Really fun to be here. So thanks, Phil, for hosting us, and thanks, everyone, for showing up.
All right. Thank you.